Okay, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Mark Alipio. I am today's instructor. You are watching a pre-recorded video as we are testing some of the feasibility of pre-recorded or automated version of our training so that we can better increase our frequency of training as well as making it available and accessible to individuals. I'm actually going to be going over with you today on the training of caregiver role in development and implementation of behavioral plans. Our goal here is in collaboration with California Care Association as well as Elegant Care Villa to provide accessible training for individuals working in both adult residential care facility and or RCFE, which is the residential care facility for the elderly. Okay, I am an administrator for both ARF and RCFE. And so our goal here is to provide you with some insights and information on how to better manage and also reduce risk when handling or at least implementing a care plan with an individual with behavioral support needs. Okay. Introduction. Individuals with developmental disabilities have many strengths and abilities, but can at times exhibit maladaptive and unfamiliar behaviors. Working with this clientele requires an understanding of the common triggers and meanings of maladaptive behaviors and skill sets that a caregiver or DSP needs to manage them. Okay. Our learning objectives will go over, or at least our goal here is for you to understand what an individual's behavior may communicate, describe how an individual's quality of life may influence the behaviors, identify how the environment may influence individual behaviors, bring awareness to how DSPs behaviors may contribute to an individual's maladaptive behaviors. Individuals may trigger and cause maladaptive behaviors, and also how to respect and value individual preferences and choices results in fewer maladaptive behaviors. Okay. So when starting out in this training, I think one of the best ways that we can start out is to actually defining what behavior is. Behavior is how one acts or conducts oneself, especially towards others. It is functional and it is also purposeful and observable for our staff, right? And so also the goal of these behaviors is to really communicate. So behaviors is also a form of communication. All behaviors, even negative and positive and maladaptive behaviors, serve a certain purpose. So, for example, when we go like this, right? That's a universal way of communicating that something is wrong with this area. Right? So in that indication, also that right there is also a behavior. It's us trying to communicate without saying my throat hurts or I'm having a hard time breathing. Okay. So in its basic form, our communication, the words that we use are types of behaviors or sets of behaviors that allow us to communicate and convey the message so that the other individual is able to receive them and also understand them. Right? So now, when speaking about maladaptive behaviors, why does it happen? This could happen in various ways. Sometimes individuals may have a difficulty or a hard time transitioning from one activity into another. And when they do transition, it becomes very overwhelming for them, or there's still some residual emotions towards the specific activity, whether they're enjoying it or they aren't. that's definitely their behaviors or their reactions afterwards is definitely impacted on how they transition into another activity, right? So it's always, when you think about the individual, when you take your child to the store and they see candy, but then they're not ready to go home yet because they haven't achieved their goal, which is to at least get something from the store, right? So then you start seeing children exhibit behaviors. So these are the types of transitionary areas in which this is referring to. This also is because it's hard or difficult for them to understand and follow the directions, so they become disoriented and resistive towards what you are trying to communicate, especially if the directions or the activity requires multi steps, right? So it's time to get ready for day program, or it's time to get ready for school. May have a different meaning for somebody that has difficulties in mobility, as well as communication, right? As opposed to somebody that would be able to complete that on their own and then also achieve being able to go into their school successfully and independently, okay? This may lead to frustration, lack of follow-throughs, or falling behind. And sometimes, even us, right, as caregivers, or actually as normal individuals, a lot of our frustrations occur when we lose control of our plans or we lose control of our routine, okay? So the most important thing, though, is how should a DSP or a caregiver adapt to these changes. So we have to consider what are what could cause these also, right? It could be a communication issue, right? If you're working in an RCFE or a place where you have individual clients with dementia, then definitely there are some considerations that there is triggers or instances where there are sundowning, and it requires attention, not only individual caregiver attention, but as well as ensuring a collaborative effort in the whole community. And that's so that way we can ensure that that we are managing how each and individual interacts. Okay, so in going back to the importance of knowing about behaviors, maladaptive behaviors interferes with the quality or the individual's quality of life. Maladaptive behavior typically, it can also be referred to as disruptive behaviors or destructive behaviors, right? So typically, it prevents the individual from becoming successful in completing any just normal tasks because of either uncontrolled emotions, or even just unable to communicate their needs. A team approach, like I said, a collaborative approach, and a plan are both key factors in addressing these types of behaviors. Caregivers and DSP have to be aware, even if they are, especially, we have to consider any kind of behaviors that could actually present three things, right? Imminent harm to self, imminent harm to staff, and imminent harm to others, right? So when any of those three becomes present in any maladaptive behaviors, a team approach is definitely something that you and your team have to consider planning ahead of time. And also be enthusiastic in being able to implement these plans, so that way you can better improve or have discussions as to how you can improve next time, right? DSP or a caregiver must use observational skills. So we talked about observational skills by using your eyes, your ears, even your sense of taste or or smell to observe, not necessarily taste. I wouldn't even say that would be appropriate, but I would say smell, right? If to observe any changes in your client's welfare or even just status, right? Determine why an individual is manifesting a maladaptive behaviors. Sometimes, and more often than not, we will actually be talking about this, the the DSP, or just by the way you look, it triggers that individual, right? So our goal there is to determine whether the client is at risk, you're at risk, or somebody else is at risk. And if you determine any of those things, you have to consider removing one of those individuals out of that equation, so that way we can start creating a way or a place where we can approach de-escalation in those situations. Okay. All right. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the main source of as a caregiver, you are the main source of input, meaning you are the main source of interaction when it comes to noticing changes in a person's behavior. This is because you are typically the one who spends the most time with this individual, and more than likely, any changes or slight changes in physical or health conditions, we as caregivers have first experience, or at least we're in the front lines in this. If you are a caregiver and you notice these changes, right, and behavioral changes have definitely occurred, it's very important that you not necessarily investigate the cause of it, but at least start to document when it started and what's changed, right? Therefore, it may be the cause of the situation, right? So and when it comes to also inputs, is that we are the main source of data input from our medical professionals, doctors, behaviorists, all these licensed individuals in the ID team depend on us for these firsthand experience or day-to-day interactions with these clients. Okay. And so we really have to look at it in a collaborative way, where it is an ID team that each individual has and plays a certain role. And so our role there is to become an advocate, as well as the holder of experiences, because sometimes clients or individuals with disabilities aren't able to express or communicate themselves in a way where everybody understands. So behavior may be also attention seeking, right? Obviously, right? When we do this, this is an indication of, hey, I'm calling to you, right? So this is what we really have to consider. And so when they are seeking attention, right, we have two options, right? Actually, we basically have two types of interactions with them, right? And so either you directly interact with them, or you completely ignore them, or don't interact with them at all, right? And so if we in terms of how we recommend, or what is the common standard practice, we definitely want to acknowledge the individual's attempt to communicate. So at any time that an individual communicates, even though it's repetitive, our goal there is to acknowledge that their communication is successful, and that we're going to try to attempt to cater to their needs, right? Some individual expresses their needs for attention through inappropriate behaviors. We can say that for even just walking down the street, catcalling is an inappropriate behavior, and it's definitely an attention-seeking behavior, right? Some effective behavior management techniques include, right? In our program, we actually recommend, in terms of behavioral management, the crisis prevention intervention techniques. In this way, we're following a national guidelines that is generally accepted by through regulations on how to handle difficult or crisis situations where it requires direct intervention or indirect interventions. Okay. So how to manage behaviors. Ignoring behaviors, use a technique called planned ignoring, which is not something that actually we're just talking about assessing about these individual techniques, but these are not necessarily what we'll go over which ones we should or should not use, right? Ignoring the behavior, use a technique called planned behavior. While we don't necessarily ignore the whole behavior, right? We ignore and we reinforce the positive behaviors as opposed to the negative behaviors, right? So in terms of the maladaptive behaviors, when they're exhibiting inappropriate behaviors, we don't reinforce it by saying good job, right? So that's what what we are referring to, is that if it is inappropriate behaviors, our goal there is to communicate that it is inappropriate, and that that we would then address it in a way where it's not disruptive or humiliating to the individual, right? Teaching replacement behaviors, model appropriate behaviors, such as hand and or physical gestures, right? So typically, in terms of modeling replacement behaviors, it does take some time, and it takes some communication and explaining to the individual, right? And in order for you to even begin to achieve teaching replacement behavior, you have to make sure that you have you have already established a relationship with this person. However, you may find it difficult for this individual to trust you. So therefore, any new concepts, any new commands, they may not take lightly of it, and so they may become resistive towards your attempts in doing so. However, when they do present some resistance, there are some techniques where you can redirect a person's attention away from the inappropriate behaviors or remove the triggering. So if they say no already, obviously your goal there is to not repeat, right? Don't do that right then and there. Your goal there is to then redirect them. Okay, I understand that you may not want to do this right now, and just let me know when you can or when you want to. I'll try again later. So in this way, you're redirecting that energy that that you are letting them know that you're going to be reinforcing to see whether they would be open to accepting or tolerating that activity at that time. Now, when we're talking about crisis situations, redirecting means also removing individuals or the triggers when we talk about triggers, it is the imminent danger, right? Removing these stimuli into out of the equation, so that way we can reduce the tension and start with the coping mechanism. Start with the coping system. Start with the supportive approach, so that the individual can then de-escalate, right? Assigning task, give the individual an individual task or responsibility that makes them feel important, right? So, hey, Johnny, today on every Tuesday is trash day, and I know that you're looking for something to do, or you may want to help me. Maybe one of these days you can start helping me with taking out the trash. So they may not, they may, or they may be open to it, right? But the point is, our goal there is also giving them the opportunities of choice. And if they don't want to, then your goal there is to find alternative activities that they may want to do, right? As caregivers, as DSPs, our goal there is to identify and really learn and build relationships with these individuals to find what would be practical for them, and also what is pragmatic, so that it's simple and easy to achieve, as well as it's reasonable for the individual to participate in the activity. Okay, so and then separating the individual. Again, removing the individuals. These are ways to manage these situations. Okay, these are types of now after that, actually, we'll be talking about types of maladaptive behaviors, right? So avoidance or aversion, avoidance of work. These are one of the things that that would actually be relevant to the conversation here, right? Is that a lot of the times work is not necessarily the clients or the individuals that is the biggest stressors in work, but rather it's the individual staff member that you work with, right? So it's very important to talk about avoidance of work, because then it creates a toxic and it creates a very, very negative working environment, right? And so avoidance of work means inappropriate behaviors, and these behaviors may occur in order to avoid work, right? If an individual is avoiding work, it is also possible that the task is too difficult to understand or execute. Some in terms of when you are faced in these situations, support is what the staff is really looking for, right? What they're looking for is for your manager or for your coworker to be able to break down the task into simpler and smaller steps, so that way it's easier for them to be able to achieve. And this also relates to how you would enable or activate your your clients to participate in household stuff. Because as caregivers, our goal there is not to do everything for them, right? Our goal there is to create an environment where they are independent and that they're able to make or they're able to achieve, even though it's mundane or routine, achieve these different tasks that would allow them to become independent or closer to becoming independent, right? And second thing is that when an individual avoids work or says no, right? Typically, sometimes they feel that they're not confident to physically complete the particular task. So, in order for you to be able to address these issues or address these resistive behaviors, providing support is one of the best things that you could do, right? I know that you may not want to do that right now. Maybe what I can do is I can show you a couple of times, and then maybe you can try to see whether you would be able to complete that task, right? Another type of support would be just physical support, right? Or also support in which you are there to provide knowledge or information if they have any questions. Okay, and then the last thing in terms of how you could then you could also achieve or a way in which you can allow them to be open to interacting or completing, not avoiding work, is to also use verbal and visual prompts. You know, it is intentional when you see quotes in work areas that's very motivational, because these these visual prompts allow the individual to internalize, reflect, and then in hopes inspire to continue the work, right? So in terms of verbal prompts, sometimes the most obvious ones would be morning rallies or even just team rallies, team huddles, and also just the mere good job, right? An acknowledgement that an individual is completing something successfully or even consistently succeeding, right? And really, it's these little things in life that we really want to be able to achieve. So similarly, right, escape behaviors. So escape behaviors may occur because it is a sensory overload, right? Too much information, time spent on a task, an environmental stimulation or noise, activity, light, physical contact, or food can cause sensory overload, right? Provide a break, keep a noise level down, change the environment. So sometimes we just get, it's too much, right? And it's okay, right? So one of the ways in which you can implement, or tools that you can utilize, is to take mindful walks, take frequent mindful walks, or even just breaks, stretches, and accepting that it may not be perfect at this moment in time, but just in time, meaning if you take a little bit of a break and you come back, then you're breaking it down into smaller pieces. So again, escape behaviors is because the task is too complicated, and so our goal there is to break it down for them, right? You can't expect them to create a master art piece if you don't provide them a breakdown on the types of colors, the canvas, you know, and also the mediums in which you're going to allow them to create a painting, right? When you're working with an individual. So, and if you don't break those activities down, typically your typical response would be a pushback, right? Push everything aside, and then they would just walk away, right? So in this way, your goal there is to also transition them into the activity. Let them know that this is what we're going to be doing, and if that would be of their interest. And of course, observe how they respond, whether they're excited or not. If they do this and you still continue, what do you think in terms of your success rate, right? Okay. So physical behaviors. This is where this is where it really is more important for you to be able to plan out and also have a collaborative approach, especially when your particular client or resident exhibits physical aggressive behaviors, right? So these physical behaviors may be harm to self, right? Head banging, harm to others, right? And or no safety awareness, right? So no safety awareness, meaning they could AWOL, they could run. These are different ways in which you may be in a situation or crisis situation that your client or individual resident is in physical or imminent harm, right? Physical behaviors. There are many responses. Reasons why behaviors may occur in patients, and some of these reasons may be due to underlying conditions or precipitating factors. Precipitating factors are typically referred to past experiences, or patient is suffering or pains, or trauma, while or it could also be adverse effects from medications. Okay, so our goal there as caregivers is we're not miracle workers. We can't prevent them from having behaviors. Our goal there is to control our own reactions, so that way we don't add to the behavior, right? So in this way, our goal is to be able to detach ourselves and become a rational foundation for that individual, right? So that way we can try to modify the behavior in itself indirectly, right? Because we can't force others or people to change their behaviors, but how we react and how we reinforce our reactions definitely can impact how individuals react. Because remember, some behaviors can be attention seeking, right? And all behaviors are communications. So which means they are trying to get some sort of reaction from you. And so our goal there is to react professionally, right? In other cases, the best way to communicate, the best way to address physical behaviors may be to try to manage underlying conditions that is causing them. So it may be that the individual is having a behavior because they don't feel well, right? Have you ever had a child that has that's sick have a tantrum, right? So in this way, our individual clients go to those basic forms of communication to be able to communicate these things when they are not able to successfully communicate with our staff, right? A lot of the times, the crisis behaviors already occurs, and so as caregivers, our goal there is to identify those situations so that we can work with our professional, our behaviors, our psychiatrists to develop a plan of care when individuals are having crisis situations, such as physical aggressive behaviors, right? And that's to self or others, okay? Because physical behavior is a form of communication, so therefore we have to look at other things. So for example, in our homes, when they start having reoccurring behaviors, one of our first things that we discuss with the ID team is whether this individual needs whether this individual may have an infection, right? A UA is conducted, or even a blood work is ordered in order for us to check that off the list, because these are some indication, especially when behaviors start to reoccur and acute and frequent. These are indication that the individual may not be feeling well. Okay, especially if they're nonverbal. I can definitely vouch for that. Okay. All right. The next thing is our role, right? The role of the DSP in the development of the plan. So I briefly kind of talked about our role in being a responsibility for collecting and gathering all this information, the experience, right? We're storytellers. We collect the experience of our individual clients through our documentations, and share the stories through our progress notes, and then we share this data to the family, the service coordinator, counselor, and also the ID team, in order for us to achieve a person-centered plan, right? So our goal here is to support our clients, and our goal here is to also ensure and advocate that we don't impede on the individual's human rights, right? So we don't develop plans that would be aggressive or physically threatening to the individual, but rather our goal there is de-escalatory and also tension reducing, so that way we can create a therapeutic approach in terms of our approach or standard practice when we're dealing with our individuals, okay? Because we don't want a stranger or even our family members impeding on our own personal rights. So at the least, the choices have to be put before us, or as a client, choices have to be put before them in order for them to feel that they're in control, right? So our role as DSPs, as well as caregivers, in developing and implementing an individual's behavioral plan is to understand the maladaptive behaviors, keep an eye on when the individual starts presenting behaviors. So our behaviorist or your behaviorist may provide you with an ABC or a documentation system or a form system in which your caregivers can document these types of information, right? When they start when the behavior starts happening, and also what leads up to it, right? So our role as DSPs is to understand and also to monitor, right? The second is to document them so that they can further review later on if it starts occurring, especially when it starts reoccurring often, right? In this case, right, so when it reoccurs again, right, we see, let's just say this, every 3 months, an individual client starts reoccurring and recycling behaviors. However, one of the underlying causes of these behaviors could also be an infection. So every 3 months, the home conducts a UA when the individual starts reoccurring these behaviors. But then also as caregivers, we also need to look at the physical indication, right? A UTI or an infection can also indicate in the urine and how they output. So as caregivers, it's our job to also be aware, so that way, without even our goal there is to reduce the times in which they have these maladaptive behaviors. So if we know already that the urine, there's physiological indications that there is an infection, then our goal there is to take proactive approach. And we're only able to do that if documentation is accurate, right? We're only able to do that if the narrative of these individuals as it's occurring is accurate, right? And so documentation is key. If you didn't document it, if it's not documented, it's considered it didn't happen, right? So figure out why. So another role for a caregiver is to figure out why it is working for the individual, right? So again, what this is referring to is look at the positive reinforcers and then the negative reinforcers, right? So when we're looking at why it works for an individual, meaning why is he exhibiting positive behaviors, right? And so in this way, the steps is often skipped by the DSP, right, resulting in confusion as to why these behaviors continue. So perception, right, is really one of the biggest culprit into this, right? That sometimes we perceive that danger may be there, or we're worried that there's danger there, but then there isn't. Or we perceive that there aren't any danger at all, but around the corner there is, right? So we often have to make sure that we identify what works in the care plan and what works and what doesn't work. Okay. And also to often communicate with your team in a collaborative approach so that you can create an individualized plan for that individual as you are as you're dealing with his behaviors. So think of it as on-the-job training, right? Because we don't really know how that individual will react, but what we can control is how we will react and how long we stay in that proximity of danger, right? So we as caregivers have a choice to first remove all our residents from harm, right? If the individual is unwilling to remove himself, then you as a caregiver, you're not necessarily working alone all the time. So then you can have a collaborative approach with your staff member and say that, hey, you know, if Mary is having this behavior and it starts to escalate and I give you the signal, it's time to remove the clients. So these are preemptive agreements with your fellow staff members to be able to ensure that you have a plan when Mary starts having deep and really disruptive behaviors. Okay. Plan to do plan what to do about it, right? So planning is key. So I'm always leading up to the next steps, right? So figure out what works, so that way we can use what works and then remove or at least modify what doesn't work and improve upon that, right? And so with those improvements, then that becomes a plan. Obviously, it's not the last plan, and it's always going to be changing because an individual's needs is not necessarily predictable. However, they do have a certain range in which they are generally content or satisfied or happy. And if they're not, right, individuals with communication deficiencies typically exhibit a higher range of behavioral maladaptive behaviors to be able to achieve their goals in communicating. So planning as a team on how to address when an individual's behaviors occur is key, right? Consult with others meaning your ID team, right? Your medical professionals. These individuals have gone through doctorate school, have achieved that level of knowledge in order for them to be able to train and support us so that we can provide a higher and better quality of life for these individuals. Because the last thing that we want to do is have to call for a call 911 or call medical assistance because we're not able to handle them and they're having crisis issues. Okay, so and also we need to make sure that we are transparent. We need to make sure that we are including all these behaviors in the IPP, right? That is the individual person plan. And this is, as we referred to, as we talked about the IPP, we're actually having another training in regards to the IPP. But the IPP is the contract between regional center and the individual client if you have a if you are working with that population. However, on the other perspective, right, if you are working with just a regular population, what we're talking about here as IPP could also be referred to as the person needs this could also be referred to as the needs and appraisal are one of the first steps, but the needs, the plan is the care plan for this individual. Okay, and typically this care plan is developed in collaboration with your ID team, the family input, the medical professional input, the home's input, as well as the individual's input combined. However, it should be central to the needs of the individual client there, right? Our program's approach in any of our care approach is a person-centered approach, okay? So that way we are able to focus on client's choice and client's ability to be able to make those choices, okay? Now, I want to have, that basically is our training. Thank you for participating in this pre-recorded video. We want to make sure that we're reminding you to please complete your quiz at the end of the module or at the end of the training. We typically provide you with a handout and at the end of that PDF handout is a link that leads you to the quiz in order for you to get your your certificate. However, if you are a partner organization or a training partner in this, then you would just talk to your administrator. Okay. Again, please take the quiz so that way you can receive your certificate. Thank you, and that ends that.